Have you ever noticed how two people facing the exact same situation can react in totally different ways? I mean, it's wild, right? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the colorful, incredibly fascinating world of human psychology. We're going to decode exactly why we all behave so uniquely. So let's jump right into the source material and unpack the science of why people behave differently, starting with the basic principles of psychological assessment. To kick things off, I want you to try a little thought experiment. Imagine what it would be like if the world around you was just one, purely monochromatic color. Like what if every single object, every landscape, and every person you saw was uniformly red, or completely blue, or entirely green? How would that world look to you? Well, as our sources point out, it honestly wouldn't be very beautiful. You probably wouldn't want to live there for long. Variability is just this fundamental fact of nature, and human beings are absolutely no exception to that rule. It's this physical and psychological variability that adds all the essential color, beauty, and richness to our world. And that brings us perfectly to our first major concept. What's super interesting here is the specific definition that psychologists actually use, which is individual differences. Basically, this refers to the distinctiveness and variations among people's physical characteristics. Things like height, weight, and strength, but also their psychological behavior patterns. Like, are they generally dominant or submissive, outgoing or withdrawn? Figuring out these differences has actually been a massive priority in modern psychology, all the way back to the time of Sir Francis Galton. It is quite literally the foundational building block for everything we're going to talk about today. But acknowledging that we're all different naturally leads us to the next really big question. What actually drives us? I mean, are our behaviors dictated by deep-seated, hardwired personal traits? Or are we just constantly reacting to whatever environment and circumstances we happen to be in? This is a huge core conflict in the study of human behavior. Psychologists have literally been debating the exact balance of these forces for decades to try and pinpoint exactly why people behave differently. So let's look at how these two forces clash. On one hand, you've got the trait perspective. This basically argues that your behaviors are driven by your personal, enduring traits. Take someone who just has a generally aggressive personality, for example. But contrast that with situationism. This perspective argues that the circumstances we're placed in have a profound, overriding influence on our behavior. So the really crucial point here is that a person who is typically super aggressive might completely flip and act highly submissive when they're standing right in front of their top boss. The external situation can be so undeniably powerful that it just overrides that innate personality trait entirely. Okay, so if our traits and our situations are constantly clashing and interacting in such complex ways, how in the world do we actually measure any of this? I mean, we can't exactly put a personality on a scale like we can with someone's physical weight, right? We basically have to measure the invisible, and psychologists do this through a process called psychological assessment. For any psychological attribute to be said to exist, it has to be measurable through strict scientific procedures. Formal assessment is absolutely crucial here. It has to be objective, standardized, and highly organized, which is totally different from the everyday informal judgments we make about people, which are obviously completely open to subjective bias. So how do we actually build that structured understanding? Well, human attributes aren't just one-dimensional. Our source uses a really fantastic analogy for this. Think about it. A point takes up no space, and a line is just a bunch of points strung together. But a box is three-dimensional. It has length, width, and height. Human psychology is exactly like that multidimensional box. To fully grasp a person's makeup, we have to measure various distinct domains. We assess cognitive functions, emotional responses, social interactions, overarching personality traits so we can predict future behavior, and deeply held values that set the standards guiding a person's life choices. It's the whole shebang. And to evaluate all of those complex dimensions, psychologists rely on 4 primary formal assessment methods. First up, we have observation. This is where you use systematic procedures to record behavior in real time, like, say, naturally observing how a mother and child interact. Second is the interview, which is exactly what it sounds like, seeking information on a one-to-one basis. Third is the self-report. This is where individuals provide factual info or opinions about themselves, using questionnaires or even personal diaries. And finally, number 4, the case study. This is an incredibly in-depth, intensive clinical look at a single individual's entire psychological history. These are the rigorous tools that literally make the invisible visible. All right, now that we know how psychologists measure these attributes, let's shift gears and look at one of the most popular, most studied, and honestly most intensely debated psychological attributes in history: intelligence. This is a massive key construct we use to understand exactly how individuals differ from one another. Broadly speaking, intelligence is our fundamental capacity to understand the world, adapt to our environment, think rationally, and use our resources effectively to overcome life's hurdles. Which brings us right to the ultimate age-old question. Why exactly are some people more intelligent than others? Is it completely hardwired into our genetics from birth, or is it shaped by the surroundings we happen to grow up in? Yep, this is the classic nature versus nurture debate, and how you answer it fundamentally changes how you view human potential. Interestingly, modern psychology actually resolves this debate by showing us that it's a really complex interplay of both. Nature, or heredity, acts by setting a sort of potential range for an individual's intelligence. It establishes your biological limits. But nurture, our environment, determines exactly where within that range we actually end up falling. Things like rich nutrition, a supportive family background, and quality schooling actually shape that final intellectual outcome. On the flip side, environmental deprivation can actively drag intelligence scores down. So, the big takeaway here? Nature and nurture don't compete, they collaborate. But what exactly are we measuring when we look at this nature-nurture outcome? A lot of the time, we tend to think of intelligence as just a single quantitative number, like an IQ score. However, modern psychology strongly suggests that there are actually different kinds of smart. Intelligence isn't just this single monolithic metric. Instead, it's much more like a rich constellation of varying abilities. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences perfectly captures this shift in how we think. After studying extremely talented individuals, Gardner proposed that intelligence simply isn't a single entity. Instead, he argued there are 8 distinct, independent types of intelligences. The really crucial takeaway here is that exhibiting exceptionally high intelligence in one specific area doesn't automatically mean you'll be high or low, for that matter, in the others. They're independent, yet they dynamically interact and work together whenever we're trying to solve complex, real-world problems. Let's zoom in on a very specific, incredibly impactful type of intelligence that has gotten a massive amount of focus lately: emotional intelligence. You've probably heard it referred to as EQ. Now, while cognitive intelligence is what helps us, solve math equations or crush logic puzzles, emotional intelligence is the crucial set of skills that lets us manage our own inner landscape and actually maintain harmony with the people around us. So, what does having a high EQ actually look like in practice? Well, the key characteristics start internally. First, you perceive and remain deeply sensitive to your own feelings. Then, that awareness extends outwardly. You're able to read other people's body language, their vocal tone, their facial expressions. But you don't just feel emotions. You actually relate those emotions to your thoughts to help make better decisions and solve problems. You understand the very real power of emotional intensity. And finally, you can actually control and regulate your emotional expressions when you're dealing with yourself and others. Ultimately, the end goal of this specific kind of intelligence is to achieve social harmony and peace. Okay, so we've established that there are all these different types of intelligences, including emotional ones. But I want to throw a little scenario your way. What happens when you have 2 equally highly intelligent people, but they differ wildly in their specific, practical, everyday skills? To answer that, we have to separate general intelligence from another super important psychological concept. Let's look at a perfect, totally relatable example from our sources. Imagine you're completely stuck on a really complex math problem. You probably know exactly who in your class to text for help. Let's just say it's your friend Aman. But what if you have a broken bike? Aman might be an absolute wizard at math, but he could be entirely useless holding a wrench. For the bike, you need to turn to your friend John. Now, both Aman and John might have very similar overall intelligence scores, but they possess entirely different specific skill sets. And that exact difference brings us to the formal definition of aptitude. While intelligence is your broad baseline capacity to adapt and understand, aptitude refers to your specific skills and abilities in distinct areas. And honestly, what's really empowering for you as a learner is the second half of that definition. Aptitudes are incredibly responsive to their environment, meaning with proper training, real focus, and a bit of effort, these specific abilities can be considerably enhanced over time. You're definitely not just stuck with the skill levels you have today. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the fundamental variations that make our world so interesting to the deep clash between traits and situations, the realities of multiple intelligences, and the highly trainable nature of our aptitudes. So I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. What unique combination of nature, nurture, and situational factors is driving your specific behavior today. By understanding the psychological attributes we've explored in this explainer, you are now way better equipped to decode not just why people behave differently, but the beautifully complex architecture of your own mind. Keep learning and keep observing.